Hello, I'm Sarah. This is Hardcover Hearts, and I'm so happy to be back with my regular schedule of videos. It's been quite an ordeal for me to kind of figure out how to get back in sync with my reading and then talking about it. It's kind of like double dutch. You're not really sure when to jump in, and that's been my challenge. But I did a TBR pile of possibilities, and that kind of started me off. So now here I am to talk about the books that I read last week, what I'm currently reading, and then potentially could read next week based on my mood and obligations. We'll talk about that. So let's get started, because I read some really great books last week, and I really missed the activity of reading and then talking about it with you all. So, I'm so elated. Thank you for coming back. And if it's your first time here, welcome. So let's get started, right? So the first thing is I'm jumping in feet first in Jane Austen July. And Leo, my friend Leo of Leo's Little Book Life, mostly on Instagram. I'll put a link to his handle below. He and I read together Northanger Abbey. Now, I have this amazing annotated edition that I cannot speak more highly of. This book has so many references, so many photos about the architecture, about what the different coaches would have looked like, and what it means when they talk about the difference between riding in one versus another. So much richness was added to the reading experience through this annotated edition. I've got the other ones. The only one I'm missing is Persuasion in the annotated edition, so I'm on the hunt for it. So in this story, this is one of her later works, and in this one she's really satirizing the Gothic novel, which was all of the rage during the time that she was writing. And she was talking specifically, she references Anne Radcliffe's Udolpho often. Now, I did a group read of some 18th century women writers, and we read a different one from Anne Radcliffe, and that was The Romance of the Forest, which is also referenced in this book. So that was an absolute delight to see. In this, we have Catherine, who is admittedly and talked about as a plain, kind of ordinary girl. She is coming into some handsomeness, but fundamentally what Jane Austen was playing with here is this anti-heroine, someone who's not remarkable in a way, which is kind of going against the grain of what other writers were doing at the time. One of the things I loved was that she says that Catherine, the main character, reads too much. And so what we see is that she reads a lot, but she doesn't have a lot of life experience. She's been living with her family in the country. She comes from a very large family, and they have friends, the Allens, who are childless and are going to Bath. So she gets an opportunity to go to Bath with them. They want to take her, and this is her great kind of coming out. And while she's there, she meets someone who she's just entranced by, this young woman, and they become fast friends. And, our Catherine just hasn't had a lot of friends, so she doesn't know what to look for, what to look out for. So she doesn't see Isabella in the ways that we see her. And she's instantly taken in. Just as she has her first friend crush, she also has her first crush. And this is with a man named Henry Tilney. And she's kind of amazed at how natural the conversation is. He's a good conversationalist. He's funny. He's interesting. And they seem to have a spark. So we go through the first part of the book is all set in Bath, and we're kind of watching her explore and navigate these new social relationships. There's some trickiness in that Isabella's brother all of a sudden goes to courting her with a furiosity and an intensity that she's just not ready to know how to handle. It creates a lot of conflict with who she wants to spend time with. And so we move into the second part of the book where she's been given an invitation to go to, finally, Northanger Abbey. I was like, when is this Abbey going to appear? So and that is the home of the Tilneys. So she goes there, and that is where all of her Gothic reading kind of really plays in, because she's read about all these abbeys and how scary they are, and all the things that happen, frightening things that happen in an abbey. And so she's a little bit caught up in that imagination, to quite some embarrassing moments, which were fun to read. Leo and I enjoyed this tremendously. It is light, it's frothy, it's fun, it's frustrating. I think the hardest thing for me was the ending was so quickened and so abrupt, and there was an introduction of a character that just popped out of nowhere, that seemed to wrap everything up tidily. And that really threw the book off for me, and made it a little less than what I otherwise would have hoped for in an ending. But great fun. So glad I read this. And again, the annotated edition, this is by Anchor Books, is phenomenal. And then I was absolutely over the moon joyous when I was granted access to the arc of a book that I actually talked about in my mid-year book freakout tag, which is Kate Atkinson's new book, The Shrines of Gaiety. So The Shrines of Gaiety is set in 1920s Soho, London, and it's very Dickensian, a ton of characters, as she's kind of known for. I will say off the bat, it is not the emotional punch that these two were. These are two of my favorite books of hers. This is Life After Life, but this one is the gut punch, A God in Ruins. It didn't have that emotional heft to it. It's much more about setting and place and time, and with all of these characters. So we open watching a cop, Frobisher, sitting out and observing the release of a notorious woman who, her name was Nellie Ma Coker. Ma Coker is what she's known as, and she owns a string of nightclubs, and she is being released from prison, and her family is there. Her 6 children are there to take her home. And it's like the press is there. It's kind of like this big to-do because she's notorious. In the car with her is a woman named Gwendolyn. She is from York, and she's a librarian who has actually quit her job to come down to London to find these two young girls who have run away. Frida is the stepsister of one of her friends, and Florence is Frida's friend who's run away with her. And they haven't heard from them. They're really, really worried. It's 1920s London, and they just don't know what's happened. And so she's here to make sure that they're okay and to hopefully bring them back. So that is the start of it, and kind of kicks off with a bang. We get to know a good number of the 6 Coker children and how they're related to the different nightclubs, and what their role in the family is. As with any Kate Atkinson book, the characters are just vibrant. They just pop off the page. It's a great setting. It's a great time period. It was good fun, but I miss that emotional heft that I sometimes get with her books. But if you are a fan of her writing, if you like this time period, cannot go wrong. It's a good summer read. I will absolutely say that. And this is actually going to be released in September 27th of this year by Doubleday. So I'm so thrilled to have gotten the opportunity to read this advance copy. So there you go for that. Then I you haven't seen me review this because I owe you that kind of as a wrap up for the month. But for Pride Month, I read Maurice by E.M. Forster. I love E.M. Forster, and at least I think I love most of his work. Room with a View is absolutely outstanding. And I really wanted to read this because this is his book that was written after his death, and it is a gay love story. So I read this, brief summary of this. It was really, really clunky in I would say the first half. I really was concerned that maybe it was published without an editor, without the opportunity for edits posthumously. It was just very pedantic. It was a lot about his being in college and philosophical conversations about the nature of the soul and sin and religion, and it just bogged me down. I did not enjoy it at all. There's a romance with him and Clive, and its slowness to kind of mature. That I enjoyed, but then there was a kind of a switch that kind of ignited it for me near the end, and I absolutely loved the I would say maybe the second half, maybe the last third. So this, at least I was happy that I read it. I understand its value in LGBTQ canon, and Forster still remains up there with me. Now, I wanted to read the follow-up, which is a debut from a writer who kind of did the sequel or a spin-off, I guess you would call it. In Maurice, at the end, he meets a young man named Alec. This book is called Alec by William de Canzio. And for a debut, I mean, phenomenal. For the kind of gumption to take on such a magnificent piece of work and then try to make it your own, I thought was really interesting. So I was already predisposed to liking it, but man, this met every single one of my expectations and more. So we start off kind of learning about Alec as he's a young boy and coming into his own, including his own sexuality and recognizing himself as a homosexual. And then it has scenes that are basically straight from Maurice, but played from Alex's point of view. And so to see Alec and his take on those same scenes was really expertly done, and it felt like a nice tie-in. And then it continues on after Maurice ends, and he starts his life with Alec, and what happens and how they grow and love each other, and what life looked like for two gay men in this time period. And this is between the wars. There's a lot of found family that is just one of my most favorite tropes in literature. I love a good found family, especially off the beaten track, living an alternative lifestyle and kind of living based on their beliefs and their mores and to their needs, right? And so that was all delightful and absolutely lovely to see them make their own way in the world and to do it with such aplomb, such support with the people that they found. Absolutely found it delightful. Then there's this very gripping thing that happens. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but both of these men have been inspired by the Greeks. And obviously Greek literature, Greek culture being so strongly homosexual, and having that be something that's out there in the open, not closeted, part of the culture. You can see why they were both drawn to Greek lore and mythology and history. Well, they also absorbed the idea of honor and the honor of war. very naively, and they sign up, they enlist in World War II. And they do it together, assuming that because they sign up together, they'll be able to go together to war. Yeah, I'm going to stop it there because I don't want to spoil anything. I absolutely loved it. You had great characterization. You had a great span of history. You had a great relationships between the characters. Really such a good debut for this author. I look forward to seeing what else they choose to do. So going from a high to a real disappointing low, I also was granted the audio for this from NetGalley. And this is something I've been looking forward to for so long. I think this was also in my mid-year book freakout tag. This is A Prayer for the Crown Shy. This is the second in Becky Chambers' series. And I found so much comfort and so much joy in the last installment of this duo. I think it's just a duology. And it tells this tale of sibling Dex, who is a tea monk. And this is a fantasy novel that is kind of set in a future where the robots have self-actualized and left the job. They've abandoned work and they've gone off on their own, splitting this world into kind of two, bifurcating it into the robots and into the humans. So the humans have been left to develop their own culture without automation, without the use of that kind of technology in interesting ways. And the robots have gone off into the woods and living their own lives. In the last book, we had the first interaction in maybe centuries between a robot, Mosscap, and sibling Dex, who was kind of moping and off on their own adventure, trying to find themselves. That book had all this wonder and exploration and things ahead that they were looking at through different eyes, but standing together on this journey. And it was tender, it was charming, a lot of heart, a lot of calmness and quiet beauty. In this one, I think the thing that didn't work for me is they're returning from their journeys and now they're going into the villages. And the problem that I found is that it became very much about explaining what utopia could look like. And so it felt very preachy, too filled with these info dumps of this is how money works in our culture. I also didn't really get on with the narrators of this. It felt that also had a wooden feel, which I think probably minimized my enjoyment of it as well. So for me, this just kind of missed the mark. This is coming out by Tor.com on 7/12, so this month, very soon, next week, July 12th. So if you are a fan of the first one and you read this, I would love to know, did you experience the same feelings after you've read it? And by all means, continue to read it. It's a very short book. So if you loved the magic of the first one and are so inclined, I would love to know what you thought of the second. So I finished those. I also finished two of my Book2 Prize translated fiction books. Here's the list. These are not in any order at all, just by size. And so I'm going to be pondering my rankings and thinking about that and filming my rankings video, submitting my ballot since I'm a judge for this current round. So all that was what I completed very, very, very successfully. Quite pleased with my week off of work and all of those readings that I got done. So what am I currently reading? Oh, okay. So I just had a conversation with Roz of Scalladandling about the books, and she and I were reading this, Tristram Shandy by Laurence Sterne. And y'all, this is just not the book for me. So Roz has so generously freed me from our buddy read of this. For me, I'm not so much a fan of a clever book where the structure is so important that everything has to fit within it. And this is a very clever book. It's clever, but it also has so many references to other books and other things that Roz and I recognize that where she's enjoying those references because it kind of shows her how it fits in the canon and is very clever. To me, it goes completely over my head, and it's such an important part of how this book is constructed and why it exists that it was getting annoying, and I was just feeling so dumb. And so then I was skimming. And for me, when I start to skim, I recognize I'm not engaged in the text in the way that I want to be. And especially in a buddy read. The last thing you want to do is to show up with a buddy read and not have anything valuable to add or a point of view. So it was stressing me out. And finally, I reached out to Roz and just said, I don't think this is the book for me. And she just so generously and kindly released me. And she said that it was helpful for her too, because she was trying to come up with things to talk to me about instead of just reading it and enjoying it as it was. There's some funny pieces in here, but there are also things that drove me crazy. And you know what it reminded me of? It reminds me of Duck's Newburyport in the fact that, those of you who read Ducks know that joke. There's a lot of lists and a lot of diversions into other topics and a lot of fixations on hobby horses or different characters' focus. And so that was very clever in that it showed me some tie-ins that Lucy Ellmann probably pulled from reading this because it's so overt. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue this on audio, but listening to it and just absorbing it as it comes, as opposed to reading it, trying to contextualize it, trying to really find something to say about it. I think that will let me get on with it and understand it, because it is something that I think is important in the canon, but I won't fixate on it. So I'll be talking more about this as I go through, but again, it's going to be a light read. A light listen, I will warn you. And I'm already about, I would say, a third of the way through. So yeah. Then I started a group read with Siân from Past Story Time. She is leading this. This is Let the Record Show, A Political History of Act Up New York, 1987 to 1993 by Sarah Schulman. Oh, this is a collection of stories told, first-person accounts of the people that were involved in ACT UP New York during this time period. I'm going to be reading this slowly. She's broken the group read into a collection of like maybe 100 some pages each week, and we'll be reading this for 5 weeks, which the pace sounds perfect because this is, I think, going to break me a little bit. It's something I own it. I wanted to read for a long time, so it's really good opportunity to get into something like this. Then I've opened my very first Nancy Mitford biography. So if you follow my channel, you know I'm a big fan of Nancy Mitford's writing. And this is The Sun King by Nancy Mitford, about Louis XIV and Versailles, the making of Versailles. I'm quite impressed with her writing in this. This is so readable. She's taking this seriously. She's taking the Nancy Mitford style, but applying actual research. And I'm so impressed. I'm only, I would say, about 1/10 of the way through. I've only read about 3 chapters, but really interested and wanting to take this a little bit more slowly. It's not very thick, but it's packed with all sorts of information about the people who who he had around him who helped him create Versailles. And it's just really interesting, loving it so far. Way to go, Nancy. Then as you can tell, I'm on a NetGalley binge right now. I was given access to another arc of an author that I like very much, and this is Annalee Huber's Verity Kent series. The next one is called A Certain Darkness, and I just started it. I have the digital copy of this, and we open with Verity and her husband being told that when her husband was in the war, he was working with a contact, and she was a spy, and he does not trust her. He thinks she was double dealing, and she has information she will only give to him. And this opens up some challenges because she hid him during the war, and they acted as if they were married. So for Verity, who those years when he was at war and she was acting as a spy as well are fraught because he doesn't talk about them a lot. This is a kind of a landmine in their marriage, potentially. He wants help. He wants her to come with him because he wants her to suss out who this person is and what her true motivations are. So it's a great setup so far. I just started it yesterday, enjoying it very much. So we'll see where that goes. Stay tuned next week. I'm sure I'll be done with it by then. This is going to be coming out August 30th by Kensington Publishing. Then on my kind of last thing I'll be doing for Jane Austen July, because I watched Northanger Abbey, is doing a spin-off. And so I'm going to be reading I am reading the Val McDermott Northanger Abbey. And Val has set this in Edinburgh, which is super fun. And a lot of the communication is via social media. That's fun too. So light, frothy read, kind of like a really nice palate cleanser between some of the other things that I'm taking on. So that's what I'm in motion with. For next week, I have two things. I'm going to be starting my buddy read of The Country Girls by Edna O'Brien. And we might be reading all three of the trilogy together. We might be reading just the first if we don't really get on with it. So stay tuned to see how far we get into this. Reading this with Eric Carl Anderson. So really excited to be reading with him again. And then for my In Real Life book club, I need to read The Promise before my friends get back from their vacations. And this is Damon Galgut. This won the Booker Prize last year. I did also find out that Damon Galgut wrote, I think it's called Arctic Crossing, and it's about a relationship that E.M. Forster had with somebody. So I'm really excited to read that. I've wanted to read A Passage to India. Leo and I are going to read it together. And so I think that'll be a really nice follow-up after. And with the success of Alec, I mean, who knew that E.M. Forster was such a breadth of material for other writers? Kind of cool, right? So that is what's currently in play. I also put a video up, I'll put a link to it below, about 2 group reads that I'm organizing. One is for August, for Women in Translation Month. Both were inspired by Women in Translation Month. The first one is Tomb of Sand by Gitanjali Shree. Here's this cover. Nice, big, chunky book. We'll be reading this in August. And the second is for September, The Books of Jacob, and this is by Olga Tatarchuk. I should say, because it is Women in Translation Month, this was translated by Daisy Rockwell. This is translated by Jennifer Croft. I'll put a link to that video below, as well as the Google form to sign up for either of those if you're so interested in joining us. I do advise watching that video because I talk a little bit about what I do when I host these types of group reads, so that way you can be better informed. And most importantly, if you say you're going to join in the video, in the comments, unless you fill out the form, I won't know to add you because I'm only going to be leveraging the form. Okay, so that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so happy that you came back and that I'm back on the saddle again with the week of reading. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead of you. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.